Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today we're going to talk about cleaning magazines and how to do it with the different types of magazines. But before I do that, let's talk about why you would even bother cleaning the magazine by taking it apart as opposed to just doing what a lot of people do. They'll take a magazine and they'll take some cleaning solvent, the same thing that they're using to clean the gun, and they'll wipe off the ugly part. So you kind of get in there with your fingers and you do one of these, and I got some gunk out, so my magazine, that's nice and shiny, my magazine's clean. And for most trips to the range and back, that's probably good enough. But over time, you're going to have to really clean the magazine more thoroughly. I'm going to close this because I don't want to knock it over and make a mess, since I don't want to have to curse on a video. So what you want to do, and this by the way, it's a really good gun solvent, there's a number of them out there. One thing you'll notice is not on the table is oil. Generally, you do not want to oil magazines. So why isn't what I just did good enough long term? Short term, I've gone to the range, I've done a couple boxes, I clean it off, and that's probably good enough in the beginning. But over time, when you look at how most of these guns operate, this is a Glock, this one's a Glock 19, and the way these work is the fired cartridge produces pressure in both directions. It's pressure pushing back this way, trying to push the slide open, and pressure pushing the bullet that way. And what they're designed is, they've got a locking mechanism, and that's that tilting barrel, that locks up solid when the pressure is high, and as the pressure drops, it starts to loosen up, and eventually it can push the slide back. It doesn't wait till the pressure reaches zero. If the pressure reached zero and the slide wasn't already moving, it wouldn't. So there's still some pressure as this comes back, and as it pulls the cartridge out, that pressure is vented both up and down, but most have some sort of a thing at the top of the barrel that will actually direct some of the pressure down. So if I put the magazine in there, basically what I'm doing is blasting hot gases and aerosolized burnt powder down into the magazine and onto the top round. Now I'm showing an empty magazine because of course I've got an empty gun, but if this were a loaded magazine, that follower would be down a ways and there would be exposure to the sides so that powder residue can get down on the sides. Or you've got something like this, which is a blowback design. It doesn't have any locking mechanism. Basically the slide and the spring are heavier than they need to be for the power of the cartridge, and just the mere weight of it delays a little bit. Same thing, you tend to have a little bit of pressure that will blow the powder residue and gases down into the magazine. So this one happens to be a PPKS, and this is just an example of a Walther, just an example of a blowback gun, and these two are examples of locked breech. Overall, the mechanism doesn't really matter so much, and this one here is a Smith & Wesson Shield, the M2.0, and it happens to be a single stack. So the magazine's thin, holds a single stack of rounds. This happens to be the EZ variant, but in the end that really doesn't matter from a functional standpoint. So no matter what it is I've chosen, I'm blowing gases, hot gases down into that magazine as the slide opens, until it opens sufficiently that those gases can easily vent elsewhere. So occasionally those gases are going to build up enough that you have to clean the magazine. So let's talk about how to do that. Most people avoid taking apart their magazines for fear they can't get them back together again, and that's actually a good thought, but it's actually fairly easy to do. And depending on the magazine, the design of the gun, the quality of the ammo you use can make a difference. And the other thing you'll note, I've got a cleaning thing going on here. I'm servicing guns. There's no ammo anywhere on this table. You want to keep it that way. You don't want to test the guns. Let's say you put the magazine together and you want to test that everything's working. Use dummy rounds, use snap caps. Never use live ammo for any kind of testing or functional demonstration when you're doing this. It's just a safety precaution. But if you look at these magazines, they're all designed somewhat similar. There's a spring, usually a flat coiled spring, drives a follower up. The top round sits on the follower, and there's a base plate that retains the spring, and it's the base plate that in most cases comes off and allows you to clean the magazine. The whole function of this follower spring assembly is to bring the next round up, make it available for loading, make it sit level, and bring it up quickly enough that as the slide comes back, which is pushing down on the top round, which is pushing this down, when it reaches a point where there's enough room for the top round to pop up, to get it there before the slide finishes moving and starts going back forward to hopefully grab that top round and shove it into the chamber. If the spring is weak or the follower is hanging up, it can cause that to be just a little too slow, and that's where you start to get double feed, stovepipes, and various malfunctions. I would say that probably once you get past the initial break-in period and before you reach end of life, where the gun is just totally worn out, the most common reasons a gun will malfunction is the gun itself hasn't been cleaned, the recoil spring's worn out, or there's a problem with the magazine. And most problems with the magazine are either they've gotten gummed up or the spring has gotten weak. One or the other. Well, the gummed up's easy to fix, and if the spring is weak, the same process that you would use to clean it is the same process that you would use to replace the spring. And of course bad ammo can do that, but you usually isolate that pretty quickly. You find out that my gun never works with Winchester white box, let's say. Okay, I don't feed that thing Winchester white box, but when you get it where it just randomly malfunctions, you'll start to see either a pattern. Every time I put this magazine in it malfunctions. Every other magazine works fine, or it always malfunctions, let's say, on the last round or the first round. Now you can start to see evidence of problem with the magazine. So, of course, to deal with that, we need to take the magazine apart. First thing I need to do is I need a tool. Now I'm going to push some of these magazines out of the way so I can just work with one. This is a Glock tool, Glock disassembly tool. It doesn't come with Glocks. You can buy these all over the place. They're at under $10. And whether you have a Glock or not, this is a useful tool. This punch size works on most things, and it's a nice handle. So whether you've got a Glock or not, or whether you wouldn't be caught dead with a Glock tool, the disassembly tool, is a good choice. Otherwise, a set of punches will work. I would avoid things like pens and screwdrivers and type things like that, because they're not really set up to have a flat point to push something. They're set up to screw screws, and they've got a point on them, so instead of flat. And I would also avoid rounds, ammo, for the same reason. Most pistol ammo is rounded, wouldn't work anyway. Rifle ammo is more pointed, but you don't put ammo on the table. So buy yourself a $10 Glock disassembly tool. Basically what I'm going to do with this is all of these will have various designs, similar concept. There's some sort of protrusion that protrudes through the base plate to prevent me from just pushing the base plate off. Most all base plates go forward. So when this is loaded, the front of the bullet would be here, the back of the cartridge would be here. Most of them go in that same direction. And the simple reason is that when I grab the magazine when it's in the gun and I squeeze my hand up against it and I'm pushing on rather than pushing off. Less likely to cause a magazine malfunction. You may find one random one that's different, but this is the typical pattern. So really what you're going to end up doing is taking your tool, pushing down on this just enough that you can see it's down a little bit, just enough to clear the base plate, and then I'm going to push the base plate forward while I have that down, and then I can pull the pick out. So I'm going to use my thumb to do it, but I don't want to do it this way. I kind of want to do it this way. So I've kind of got my thumb on there like that, and it's using kind of the fatty part of my thumb. And the reason for that is when I push down on this and push forward, you notice my thumb is now over the opening. There's a spring in there, and that spring's under tension, and it wants to fly. And it particularly wants to fly and hit me right in the face, because that's what springs like to do. My thumb, as this is coming off, when I get to about the 3/4, 2/3 mark, I'll usually notice that my thumb is pretty much covering the whole base of the magazine. I can just pull this out. But now I've retained that base plate and the spring. And you'll see there is a base plate. And as I release it, there's that much spring that was under tension and coiled. That would have probably felt really good if it got in my face. So that little trick allows you to pop the thing off nice and seamlessly. And it gets to the point where once you're doing this and you practice, so you push the pin in, you pop the whole thing off, and the base plate falls in front of you, and you do it like a pro, like you've been doing this for 100 years. Now, most of these magazines, the springs are somewhat directional. So as I take this apart, I'm not just going to start yanking parts off of this. I'm going to set the base plate aside. The Glock tool can be set aside for a moment. I usually will lay the magazine down so that I can then take it apart and retain the orientation. And I typically lay it down with the bullet side forward, so the chamber side away from me. You can do it either way, but just come up with a consistent pattern. So now it's relatively easy for me to see how the parts go back together. Some magazines, if you try to put them back together wrong, it'll be very obvious. Others, it won't be so obvious. It'll be a subtle difference, and it will cause the follower to hang up. Now, this particular magazine is unlike many. I picked this one first because it illustrated the spring because it was open, but it's got a little guide thing. And this is to grab your fingers to grab on, and it also partially operates the slide stop slide release on the gun. Any that have this type of a concept, something that sticks out of the magazine, will have a position somewhere, and you'll see it's here, that you can remove that. So I'm going to slide the follower down till I line up with that hole, and then that part drops out. Now this, when I took it apart, I wanted to make sure that I knew which way it went, because you'll see that it is formed differently. And you could catch it with your hand if you're not sure the first time. And then I pulled the follower out. Now the follower is the easiest part, because one thing I forgot to tell you is look at the magazine when it's together before you take it apart and kind of see what looks right. So I can see if I'd looked at it beforehand, which of course I did on this one, I'd be fairly obvious if I've got this turned backwards. Because you don't want to assemble the magazine backwards, it won't work. So now that I've done that, I can start to clean the magazine. So I'm going to take you can clean quite a few magazines with a single rag. In this case, since I'd already gotten this rag dirty, I can use it because it's not filthy. So I'm going to rehydrate it a little bit with some solvent, and I'm going to clean the follower, and I'm going to clean the sides. I'm going to clean the whole follower. Now I'm not looking to make this thing all shiny and brand new. I'm not cleaning $100,000 worth of Ferrari. I'm just cleaning a magazine, but what I'm wanting to do is get residue off any of the areas where it slides. Anything that is involved in making the gun function, I want to get the residue off. A little bit less important on the top, because that's going to, the very first round you fire, it's going to be dirty again. I've taken the magazine apart, so I'm more interested in the sides. And you'll see it was dirty here in the center, but now I'm getting some dirt over here on the edges. And you take whatever cleaning rod you use to clean your barrel. It's the same concept. Put the patch through it, and then clean the front, the back, and the sides of the magazine body itself. Now you might also think that, okay, when do I need to do this? 2 rounds, 200 rounds, 2,000 rounds, 200,000 rounds. You kind of want to do it every 1,000 rounds or so, but there's one other time in the life of a pistol to do it, and that's day one, before you actually take it to the range for the first time. If when you pull the magazines out, they're clean and dry, then you don't need to worry about it. But a lot of magazines, especially for older hammer fire designs, will be gunked up with oil and residue. Magazines should not be oiled. They do that so that they don't corrode. This is a stainless steel mag, so this thing was bone dry when it came from the factory. And Glock mags, they're polymer with a steel liner, and they don't come oiled. But you'll often find some of the older hammer fire designs, those magazines will come oiled with either Cosmoline equivalent or something like that. That'll gum them up, so you want to clean them. Now, I want to clean the spring. So what I want to do is I want to take this off, but I want to take a look at the spring and find out something unique about it that makes it where I know which way goes which. So this one is orange at the bottom, so I know that's the bottom. And I know that when it's in my hand, the proper way it would go in the magazine, that this hook is open on the bottom side. Or I could look to say this hook is open on the bottom side here. So I know that's backwards, that's frontwards. So now when I start flipping this thing around in my hand as I clean it, which I'm going to clean the body of it, and you can also often just kind of rotate around. So I'm kind of just rotating through the coils. But I'm going to clean this thing, and I'm not going to sit here boring you cleaning this every last spot of this, but you want to clean this spring. And it's a little less important to clean these components at the bottom, but why not? I got the thing apart, so why wouldn't I clean the bottom parts of it and the base plate? Mostly the important parts are the body, the spring, and the follower. That's where all the action happens. But clean the whole thing while you got it apart. Now it's time to put it back together again. So first thing I need to do is orient my spring correctly, which it's not at the moment. So I flip it over, and it's still not at the moment, and now it's correct. I know that because I looked at it and picked landmarks on it, for lack of a better description, and I've got my follower. So the easiest way to do this is orient the magazine in the pattern you've chosen, bullet first or chamber side first. Set the follower in it, and then set it down and set the spring in the follower. Because at this point I can use the table and everything to kind of guide things up. The follower on a single stack is going to follow pretty easily. It's going to kind of do its job. But on a double stack mag, it's going to have a tendency to want to wiggle or flip over or turn. And of course on this magazine I did skip a step, because you'll notice that there's a part sitting here on the table that's supposed to be right there. So I do need to kind of back it up a little bit, and I need to insert this piece here, which you just get it back in the correct orientation and insert it from the underside, and in it goes. In order to do this, I'm going to need to turn it towards my face because it wants to wiggle around. So I'm just going to get this in here and then I'll resume for you. So I got that in there. What I ended up having to do is use my tool to hold the follower in place to keep, because basically that became a three-handed operation, hold the follower in place while I put it in there. The bottom line is I have this back in place, and then we can go back to the same plan I had of putting the magazine spring into the follower and using that to drive it up. The next thing I need to do is put my base back on there, which I took the time to make sure was oriented correctly. And you can see on this magazine the shape. See how the magazine's fatter at the back, narrower at the front, and there's a point. Fatter at the back, narrower at the front, and there's a point, and then this protrudes forward. So that gives me the ability to put this down in here. So if you do happen to follow all the perfect instructions and you lay everything out right, and then the cat knocks some part off the table and you got to pick it up, you can usually figure it out just by being careful to look at it. So now I've got this magazine ready to reassemble. I need to get the base plate on it. So what I need to do is push this down so it's well below the level, and most of these will have some sort of a groove that lines up, and I can push this on. And I want to push it on until it catches on something. And I had to move my finger back, so now I've got my fingernail holding it. But the bottom line is I don't want to do it where it just comes on and off. I want to go far enough back that it's catching on something before I place the spring tension on the base plate. I don't want it to just tip up and flip. And then I'm going to push it back all the way, and if you're lucky, this will just kind of snap. Sometimes it doesn't. You can give it sometimes a little poke with the thing, or you can cycle the follower. There, I just heard it click. So I cycled the follower and that clicked. So now the magazine is reassembled and this won't come off by accident and dump the guts of the magazine down onto the range floor. So now I have a cleaned mag that's ready to go. Now you can also, if you don't have wings, you can use the handle end of a cleaning tool to push the follower down. The big thing is to make sure you use something that has a big enough hoop and you keep it centered so that it doesn't get between the follower and the wall, which on a single stack it's unlikely to do, but on a double stack, when the magazine fattens out to make room for the alternating stack of ammo, you can actually get the hoop between the magazine body and the follower. If you do that, don't try to pull it out. It will probably jam on some part of the follower and damage it. Just take it apart, pull it apart, and start over. But at this point I have a cleaned and ready to go magazine. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to bore you by cleaning every single magazine I've got on the table, but I have an assortment of different magazines that use different strategies for retaining. So I'm just going to briefly show you how those different strategies work. I've got this Walther PPQ magazine, and this uses pretty much the same strategy, other than it's a double stack. Same basic concept. I'm going to take my thumb, curl it over, push down on this, push the plate forward, and take it out. This one has a kind of a flat metal plate that has a little hook on it that connects to the bottom of the spring. But again, you'll see that there's a distinct shape to it. It's rounded at the front, squared at the back. The magazine is rounded at the front, squared at the back. So it would be easy if I did drop this to figure out, and of course the protrusion sticks downward towards the base plate. The rest of the process is very much the same. You'd pull this apart the same way, you'd set it on the table, try to keep things in an orientation. I followed my standard pattern of the chamber side forward. So you would clean and maintain this one in the same way, and you'd put it back together the same way. Now one thing you're going to find with the double stack is that the spring is kind of wider, the hoops are wider, the body is wider, there's more opportunity to torque it. So you have to be a little more careful with running this down. But the same thing, I'm just going to get it down below the base of the magazine. I've got my whole finger in there. then I put the magazine base plate on enough that it's grabbing, and then I can start to back my finger out and go to where just my fingertip is holding it, and then slowly work my way out, and it snaps in place. I do tend to like to give the follower just kind of a little push just to make sure that it hasn't tilted or gotten sideways, but that magazine's back together and ready to go. Two other designs that are somewhat similar but behave a little differently. The Smith & Wesson magazine has what looks like a totally different design, and it looks like you might have to pry this forward or turn it into a switch. Now it works the same. You just push it down on that point. It's a little harder to get it, but then it comes apart the same way. This one has a plastic base. It's shaped differently at the front than the back. It's kind of a little bit around. So you got all those same patterns. And I'm going to just go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to push this in there with my finger. Oops. Now that can happen, but you'll notice what happened when that happened. Because I had it facing away from me, the spring didn't get too far and this flew, but it didn't hit me in the face. And that's the important part. When you're doing this, if you do this enough, you're going to have at least one fly apart on you. Most of the time it's because you don't get it just right in your hand. But don't let that panic you. But you'll notice throughout this whole thing, my face is way back here. This magazine is facing away from my face and away from anybody in the room, and it's facing away from Hammer, who's running the camera. So he's over here, and I've got it kind of facing this way. Pop it back, snaps in place. Give the follower a little push to make sure that it's free, and I've got an assembled mag. Now this XDM mag has got a very small hole, and actually this happens to be a Hellcat mag, but the XDM mags are similar. It's got a very small hole, and it doesn't look like there's a button. Well, it's actually the spring, but it works the same. Thumb, I'm just pushing the spring down a little bit, pull it off, but there's no base. The spring just sits into the base plate of the magazine. There's no extra little base or component. These work the same. The only thing you're going to find with these is they're a little harder to get hold of. I mean, the other one I could set my finger, I had this whole thing to put my finger on. These are a little bit more of a pain because I got to get this wiggly spring in there, and you end up generally having to do two fingers with these. So I've got my finger across the spring, and then I'm going to kind of play this little game of wiggle the finger, wiggle the base plate, and work the base plate back onto it. And these are probably the worst to deal with. But all I did is I just kind of wiggled back and forth, trading places with the base plate and my finger until I could slowly retract my finger and then bring the base plate forward. Now, right there is another problem you'll have with this design. I'm just going to pull this back just far enough to be able to push that coil back in and get over it. Clip, I'm done. Now, because I didn't keep pushing and I didn't give it a hard shove, I didn't damage the coil, and I didn't want to take it all the way back off because otherwise it's just going to fly apart again. So this particular design is more of a hassle to clean than some others. Now we get to the one that's the worst, the Glock. And the Glock magazines are designed to be very durable, very solid, never come apart unless you want them to, but they don't want to come apart when you want them to. If you look at it, you'll see there's a little notch there, and it's square at the back, and it's square here. So where my finger is, so I get it where you can see it right here. There's a notch on the body of the magazine, and there's a cutout in the base plate for that notch. And it's beveled at the front, and it's flush square at the back. The camera doesn't really want to focus. But that will prevent you from taking the base plate off. I'm going to turn this a little another way to see if I can get the camera to focus on it. Right there, that focused. You can see it right there. It's beveled at the front and square at the back. So to take these apart, there's two ways to do it. One, if you've got strong hands, you can squeeze the magazine here. You can squeeze the magazine, you can push in on this, and you can rock it forward and get it to snap off, which is hard to do at this angle. I'm going to do it this way. So if you got strong enough hands to compress that, you can easily do that way. You don't want to just force it off. But there's a better way. Strong hands or not, if you've got something like this thing, and there's a number of these on the market, this is just the one that I happen to pick. It's actually a disassembly tool for Glock, specifically for Glock magazines. And the funny thing about Glock is, one of their bragging rights of Glock is that you can take apart a Glock with one tool, this one, except the magazine. I guess they're assuming that you got gorilla hands to take apart the magazine. During editing, I noticed that there were some sections of using this tool that were kind of hard to see. So I'm going to replace that with a redo of this little piece of it, so there's a little bit of inconsistency as I cut this in. But what it comes down to is there's two pins on this tool, one that faces forward and one that faces up, and they each have a purpose. The one that faces forward is used to get the base plate broken free without damaging it. So with the magazine facing with the pin downward, you line it up on this tilted pin and push it back. And then I'm actually going to push down on the magazine from the front. So I rocked the magazine down. The front end of the magazine went towards the table while staying on the pin, and that broke the base plate free. Then I can take, at this point I could just take it apart the rest of the way. I could do the whole thumb thing and I could take it apart. But one nice thing about the tool is I can take that hole and line it up on this second pin, and then I can either hold the tool at the back here or I can hold it on the sides, but I can push the magazine forward. And when I do that, it retains the base plate, and it also retained the spring, and then I can just slowly lift my hands up to take the tension off it. And once I take the tension off it, now it's like any other magazine. So it takes and turns a Glock magazine, which is rather a hassle to disassemble, into a fairly easy job. There's a few different designs like this on the market. There's a handheld one that looks like a lever. They all work fundamentally the same. This particular one is fairly easy to use even if you don't have strong hands. Now, this particular one I had cleaned, meaning I cleaned it when I just wiped the top off. At the very beginning of the video I demonstrated that, I've cleaned the magazine thing, but you can see there's residue. I didn't really clean the magazine. There was residue on that side, there's residue here. So when I wiped off the top, all I accomplished was wiping off the top. So that kind of gives you an idea why you would need to occasionally take apart this magazine to clean it. So then to reassemble the Glock magazine, luckily you don't need any tools. Do the same thing, put the spring back up in there, set the little follower thing on the spring correctly. Now on the Glock one, there's really not anything to retain it. It just kind of slides around. So you just kind of have to work it back into the hole. Now because these little retaining things are beveled a little bit on the front, it does go back together without a tool. So I just can slide it on there and slide it back in place, and then you hear that click. If it hadn't clicked, I could do the same thing. Just kind of drive the follower a little bit, and at some point you'll hear it click. One thing to note, it's better not to drive the follower by loading ammo in it. Use something like this, it's safe. You're not going to worry about loading a magazine when you're not expecting to or intending to load a magazine. And then it's back together. So overall, hopefully that kind of gives a good idea of how to take apart the common magazines, how to not have everything come apart on you or catch a base plate component in the face, and why. Why would you clean your magazines? Getting oil out of them or grease out of them from initial manufacture or shipping, or getting residue out from over time. Hopefully that helps. If there's other cleaning things that you're interested in, please give us a note in the comments and we'll look into doing other videos. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, click that bell to be notified if you do. Check us out on Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, pretty much everywhere. Thank you.